Marcus Thompson pushed his mop bucket down the gleaming hallways of the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado at 4:30 a.m., just like he had every morning for the past 8 years. The base was quiet except for the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore and the occasional footsteps of early rising SEALs heading to their brutal training sessions. At 52 years old, Marcus had become part of the furniture. Officers walked past him without a glance. Recruits barely acknowledged his presence, and even the seasoned SEALs treated him like he was invisible. To them, he was just another maintenance worker keeping their world clean and organized. They had no idea about the man beneath the janitor's uniform. Marcus had learned to prefer it that way. After 23 years in the Navy, including 12 as a deep-sea diver and underwater demolitions expert, he had earned his anonymity. His military records were classified, sealed away in files that most people on this base would never see. The Purple Heart tucked away in his small apartment told a story of courage under fire. But Marcus never spoke about it. Every morning, as he cleaned the locker rooms and training facilities, Marcus listened to the SEALs discussing their upcoming challenges. They talked about underwater endurance tests, breath-holding competitions, and the legendary records that seemed impossible to break. The current underwater distance record holder was Lieutenant Commander Jake Iron Lungs Morrison, a SEAL who could swim 450 meters underwater on a single breath. It was a record that had stood for 3 years, and Morrison never let anyone forget it. Marcus had watched Morrison train countless times while cleaning the pool area. The man was undeniably skilled, but Marcus noticed flaws in his technique that no one else seemed to see. Morrison relied too heavily on brute force and not enough on efficiency. His breathing preparation was good but not optimal, and his underwater stroke technique wasted precious energy. The other SEALs worshipped Morrison's record. They would gather around the pool during training sessions, timing each other's attempts and falling short by hundreds of meters. The closest anyone had come was 380 meters, achieved by a young SEAL named Rodriguez who had nearly passed out in the attempt. Marcus continued his cleaning routine, moving like a ghost through their world. He wiped down the pool deck while they trained, emptied trash cans during their briefings, and mopped floors while they shared stories of their underwater adventures. They never asked his opinion, never wondered about his background, never considered that the quiet man with the mop might know more about underwater operations than any of them. During his lunch breaks, Marcus would sit alone on a bench overlooking the Pacific Ocean. He would watch the waves and remember his own underwater missions from decades past. In his mind, he could still feel the crushing pressure of deep water, the burning sensation in his lungs as oxygen ran low, and the absolute focus required to complete dangerous underwater demolitions while enemy forces searched above. His old diving instructor's voice still echoed in his memory. "The water doesn't care about your rank or your ego. It only respects those who understand its rules." Marcus had learned those rules the hard way, through countless hours of training that pushed human limits and real-world missions where failure meant death. But those days were behind him now. A back injury during his final mission had ended his diving career and led to his medical retirement. The Navy had offered him this civilian position at Coronado, and he had accepted it gratefully. It kept him close to the water he loved and the military culture that had shaped him, even if his role had changed dramatically. As the months passed, Marcus noticed that the SEALs were becoming increasingly frustrated with their underwater performance. Morrison's record seemed untouchable, and morale was beginning to suffer. Younger SEALs were pushing themselves too hard, taking dangerous risks that reminded Marcus of his own reckless youth. One evening, while cleaning the training facility, Marcus overheard a heated conversation between Morrison and the base commander. They were discussing an upcoming inter-base competition, where Coronado's reputation would be on the line. Other SEAL teams from across the country would be sending their best swimmers to challenge Morrison's record. "Sir, with respect, some of these guys from Virginia Beach and Little Creek are getting close to my numbers in training," Morrison admitted, his usual confidence shaken. "I need to push my record higher before the competition or we might lose our standing." The commander nodded grimly. "This base has held that record for 3 years, Morrison. Losing it would be more than just embarrassing. It would damage our reputation as the premier SEAL training facility." Marcus finished his cleaning and left the building, but their conversation stayed with him. He understood the pride at stake, and the pressure these men faced to maintain their elite status. As he walked to his car, he made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, Marcus arrived at work earlier than usual. He stood at the edge of the training pool looking down into the crystal-clear water that reflected the early morning light. For the first time in 8 years, he was seriously considering stepping out of the shadows and revealing who he really was. The water called to him, just as it had 30 years ago when he first learned to dive. But this time, it wasn't about completing a mission or proving himself to superior officers. This time, it was about showing these young warriors that experience and wisdom could triumph over youth and arrogance, and that sometimes the most unlikely heroes are hiding in plain sight. Marcus spent the weekend researching the current underwater swimming techniques and training methods used by modern SEALs. He visited the base library using his access card to review training manuals and competition records. What he discovered both impressed and concerned him. The SEALs had access to better equipment and more scientific training methods than he had during his active years. But they were missing some fundamental principles that had kept him alive during countless underwater missions. Their focus on raw physical power was impressive, but they were neglecting the mental preparation and energy conservation techniques that separated good divers from legendary ones. On Monday morning, Marcus arrived at the pool area just as Morrison was completing his morning training session. The SEAL had managed 420 meters underwater, 30 meters short of his record, and his frustration was obvious to everyone watching. "I'm losing my edge," Morrison muttered to his training partner as they climbed out of the pool. "The competition is in 6 weeks and I can't even match my own record anymore." Marcus continued cleaning around the pool area, but his mind was racing. He had been watching these training sessions for months, analyzing every swimmer's technique and noting their mistakes. Morrison's biggest problem wasn't physical conditioning. It was his approach to breath control and energy management. During his lunch break, Marcus made a decision that surprised even himself. He approached Commander Hayes, the officer in charge of SEAL training operations. Hayes was a respected veteran who had served multiple tours overseas, and Marcus had always found him to be fair and approachable. "Commander, could I have a word with you?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the nervous energy building in his chest. Hayes looked up from his paperwork, clearly surprised that the quiet janitor was initiating a conversation. "Of course, Marcus. What can I do for you?" Marcus took a deep breath. "Sir, I've been watching the underwater training sessions and I think I might be able to help with the preparation for the upcoming competition." The commander's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Help how exactly?" "I have some experience with underwater operations from my Navy days," Marcus said carefully. "I've noticed some techniques that might improve the team's performance." Hayes leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with new interest. "What kind of experience are we talking about?" Marcus pulled out his military ID card and handed it to the commander. "I retired as a chief petty officer after 23 years. 12 of those years were spent in underwater demolitions and deep-sea diving operations." The commander examined the ID card closely, then looked up at Marcus with a completely different expression. "Why didn't you ever mention this before?" "It never seemed relevant to my current job," Marcus replied honestly. "But I've been watching these young SEALs struggle with techniques that could be improved with some old-school methods." Hayes stood up and walked to his computer. He typed in Marcus's service number and waited as classified records began appearing on his screen. As he read, his expression changed from curiosity to amazement. "Marcus, according to this file, you held multiple underwater endurance records during your active duty. It says here you once completed a 600-meter underwater swim during a classified mission in 1998. Marcus nodded. "Yes, sir. That was during a harbor infiltration operation. The circumstances were different from pool training, but the techniques are transferable." The commander continued reading. "You were awarded the Navy Commendation Medal for underwater demolitions work, and you served as a diving instructor at the Naval Diving and Salvage Training Center." Hayes looked up from the screen. "How is it possible that no one here knows about your background?" "I prefer to keep my past private, sir. But watching these SEALs prepare for competition has reminded me how much I still care about underwater excellence." Hayes sat down again, clearly processing this unexpected revelation. "What specifically do you think you could contribute to their training?" Marcus had been preparing for this question all weekend. The current training focuses heavily on physical conditioning and breath-holding exercises. Those are important, but they're missing some crucial elements. Proper energy conservation, advanced breathing techniques, and mental preparation can add significant distance to their underwater performance. Can you be more specific? Morrison is wasting energy with inefficient stroke mechanics. He's also experiencing anxiety about maintaining his record, which is affecting his breathing preparation. Rodriguez has excellent natural ability, but needs guidance on pacing and energy distribution. The other swimmers are pushing too hard too early and burning out before they reach their potential. The commander was quiet for a long moment, clearly impressed by Marcus's detailed observations. What would you propose? Give me 2 weeks to work with Morrison privately, Marcus said. If I can help him break his own record, then consider letting me assist with the entire team's preparation for the competition. Hayes tapped his fingers on his desk, weighing the unusual request. Marcus, you understand that if word gets out that we're taking swimming advice from our janitor, it could create some interesting reactions among the SEALs. I understand, sir. That's why I'm suggesting we start with just Morrison. If my methods don't work, then no harm is done and we keep this conversation between us. The commander stood up and extended his hand to Marcus. You've got your 2 weeks, but I want daily progress reports, and if Lieutenant Commander Morrison has any concerns about this arrangement, we stop immediately. Marcus shook the commander's hand, feeling a surge of excitement he hadn't experienced in years. Thank you, sir. You won't regret this decision. I hope not, Hayes replied, because if this works out, you might just save our reputation. And if it doesn't, he paused and smiled. Well, at least our floors will still be clean. That afternoon, Commander Hayes called Morrison into his office. The conversation that followed would set everything in motion and begin the most unusual training partnership in SEAL history. Marcus spent the rest of the day planning his approach, knowing that he had one chance to prove that experience and wisdom could compete with youth and strength. The invisible janitor was about to step into the spotlight, and there would be no going back. Lieutenant Commander Morrison stood at the edge of the pool at 5:30 a.m., checking his watch and wondering why Commander Hayes had ordered him to report for a special training session with the base janitor. The whole situation felt surreal, like something out of a movie rather than real military life. When Marcus arrived carrying a small bag of equipment instead of his usual mop and bucket, Morrison's skepticism was written all over his face. So Commander Hayes tells me you're some kind of underwater expert, Morrison said, his tone barely concealing his doubt. Marcus set down his bag and looked directly at Morrison. I'm someone who wants to help you break your own record and prepare for the competition. Whether that makes me an expert is for you to decide. Look, no disrespect, but I've been training with the best coaches and using the most advanced techniques available. What could you possibly teach me that I haven't already learned? Marcus pulled out an old diving mask and a simple pair of fins from his bag. Sometimes the newest techniques aren't the best techniques. Sometimes the old ways work better because they've been tested in real-world situations where failure meant death, not just a poor training score. Morrison examined the equipment, noting its simplicity compared to his high-tech gear. This looks like museum pieces. This mask helped me complete underwater missions that your modern equipment couldn't handle, Marcus replied calmly. But we're not here to discuss equipment. We're here to discuss technique. Get in the pool. For the next hour, Marcus observed Morrison's swimming style without offering any criticism or suggestions. He watched the SEAL complete several underwater laps, timing each one and noting the swimmer's breathing patterns, stroke mechanics, and energy expenditure. When Morrison climbed out after his final attempt, a respectable 430-meter swim that left him gasping, Marcus was ready with his assessment. You're fighting the water instead of working with it, Marcus said. Your stroke is powerful but inefficient. You're burning energy in the first 100 meters that you'll need in the final 50 meters. Morrison wiped water from his face, still breathing hard. My stroke technique was developed by Olympic coaches. It's been proven effective. Effective for sprint swimming in competitions with multiple breathing opportunities, Marcus agreed. But underwater endurance requires different techniques. Watch this. Marcus walked to the pool edge and, still wearing his janitor's uniform, slipped into the water. Morrison expected him to change into swim gear, but instead Marcus simply removed his shoes and shirt, keeping on his work pants. What are you doing? Morrison asked. Showing you efficiency, Marcus replied. Without any warm-up or breathing exercises, Marcus pushed off from the wall and disappeared beneath the surface. His stroke was unlike anything Morrison had seen from modern swimmers. It was smooth, almost lazy-looking, with long glides between each stroke and minimal splash or disturbance. Morrison started his stopwatch and followed Marcus's progress from the pool deck. The older man moved through the water like he belonged there, his body position perfect and his movements seemingly effortless. Unlike Morrison's powerful but aggressive technique, Marcus appeared to be conserving energy with every stroke. At the 200-meter mark, Morrison expected to see signs of strain or oxygen debt, but Marcus maintained his steady pace. At 300 meters, Morrison began to realize he was witnessing something extraordinary. At 400 meters, Morrison's own record distance, Marcus showed no signs of slowing down. When Marcus finally surfaced at the 520-meter mark, he wasn't gasping for air or showing signs of extreme oxygen debt. He treaded water calmly for a moment before swimming to the pool edge with a normal stroke. Morrison stared at his stopwatch in disbelief. "That's impossible. You just swam 70 meters farther than my record and you're not even breathing hard." Marcus climbed out of the pool, water dripping from his work pants. "It's not impossible. It's just a different approach to energy management and breathing efficiency." "But how? What did you do differently?" Marcus picked up a towel and began drying off. "First, I used a stroke technique that maximizes glide time and minimizes energy expenditure. Second, I prepared my breathing differently before entering the water. Third, I controlled my heart rate and mental state to reduce oxygen consumption." Morrison sat down on a bench, still processing what he had witnessed. "Can you teach me to do that?" "That depends on whether you're willing to unlearn some of what you think you know and trust techniques that might seem outdated or unconventional." Morrison looked at the pool, then back at Marcus. "If you can help me swim like that, I'll try anything you suggest." Marcus nodded and sat down beside Morrison. "Good, because what I'm going to teach you over the next 2 weeks will challenge everything you've been taught about underwater swimming. We're going to start with breathing techniques that were developed for combat divers in situations where making noise could get you killed." For the remainder of their session, Marcus introduced Morrison to breathing exercises that focused on oxygen saturation and carbon dioxide tolerance. These weren't the standard hyperventilation techniques used by many modern swimmers, but controlled breathing patterns that prepared the body for extended oxygen deprivation while maintaining mental clarity. "The biggest mistake modern swimmers make is thinking that holding their breath longer is just about lung capacity," Marcus explained. "It's actually about training your body to function efficiently, with limited oxygen and teaching your mind to stay calm when your body starts demanding air." Morrison practiced the breathing exercises while Marcus explained the science behind them. These techniques had been refined during decades of military diving operations, where panic could be fatal and efficiency was the difference between mission success and failure. By the end of their first session, Morrison had improved his underwater distance to 460 meters, using Marcus's breathing preparation alone, without any changes to his stroke technique. "This is just the beginning," Marcus told him as they prepared to leave. "Tomorrow we'll work on stroke mechanics and energy conservation. By the end of 2 weeks, you'll not only break your own record, you'll set a new standard that other SEALs will be trying to match for years." Morrison looked at Marcus with new respect. "Why did you wait so long to offer this help?" Marcus smiled as he picked up his janitor's uniform. "Because sometimes people need to be ready to learn before they can benefit from teaching. You weren't ready until now." As they left the pool area, Morrison realized that his perception of the quiet janitor had changed completely. He was now training with a master, and the next 2 weeks would prove whether he was worthy of the lessons being offered. Day by day, Morrison's underwater performance improved dramatically under Marcus's guidance. Word of the unusual training partnership had begun to spread quietly through the base, and other SEALs started finding excuses to be near the pool during their early morning sessions. Marcus had introduced Morrison to techniques that most modern swimmers had never encountered. Instead of the aggressive, power-based approach that dominated contemporary training, Marcus taught efficiency-based methods that had been perfected during real combat situations. "Your body is like a submarine," Marcus explained during their 5th training session. "A submarine doesn't fight its way through water with brute force. It moves efficiently, conserving energy for when it's needed most. Every movement should have a purpose and every breath should be maximized." Morrison was learning to glide longer between strokes, reducing his stroke count from 180 per 100 meters to just 120. This change alone had added significant distance to his underwater swimming, but Marcus wasn't finished with the technical improvements. "Now we work on your mental game," Marcus announced during their second week together. "Physical technique will only take you so far. The real breakthrough comes when your mind learns to stay calm in situations where your body is screaming for oxygen." Marcus introduced Morrison to meditation techniques that had been used by combat divers to maintain focus during life-threatening underwater missions. These weren't New Age relaxation methods, but practical mental training designed to function under extreme stress. During underwater demolition missions, we sometimes had to remain submerged for extended periods while enemy forces searched above us, Marcus explained. Panic meant death, so we learned to separate our minds from our body's natural fear responses. Morrison practiced these mental techniques daily, learning to maintain calm awareness even when his lungs burned for air and his body demanded that he surface immediately. Marcus taught him to recognize the difference between actual oxygen deprivation and the psychological panic that caused most swimmers to surface prematurely. By the 10th day of training, Morrison had achieved a personal best of 495 meters underwater, 45 meters beyond his previous record. But Marcus wasn't satisfied with the improvement. "You're still holding back," Marcus observed after Morrison's latest attempt. "There's a point during every swim where you make a mental decision to surface. We need to push that decision point further." "I feel like I'm drowning," Morrison admitted. "Every instinct tells me to come up for air." Marcus nodded understandingly. "That's exactly the barrier we need to break through. Your body can go much further than your mind currently allows. Tomorrow we're going to simulate the pressure and urgency of a real combat situation." The next morning, Marcus arrived at the pool with equipment that Morrison had never seen before. It included underwater communication devices, simulated explosive charges, and a detailed mission briefing. "Today you're not just swimming for distance," Marcus announced. "You're completing an underwater infiltration mission. Your target is at the 600-meter mark, and failure to reach it means mission failure and potential loss of life for your team." Morrison studied the mission parameters, realizing that Marcus was creating a psychological framework that would push him beyond his perceived limitations. "You want me to treat this like a real combat situation?" "Exactly. During actual missions, swimming farther wasn't a choice, it was a requirement for survival. When your mind believes that surfacing early means failure and death, it finds reserves of strength and endurance that you never knew existed." The simulation began with Morrison receiving a detailed briefing about his target, the layout of the enemy harbor he was supposedly infiltrating, and the consequences of detection. Marcus had created enough realistic detail to engage Morrison's military training and override his swimming competition mindset. When Morrison entered the water, his approach was completely different. Instead of swimming for personal achievement, he was completing a mission that required absolute success. His stroke became more purposeful, his mental state more focused, and his determination unshakable. At the 400-meter mark, where Morrison would normally begin considering his exit strategy, he pushed forward with military determination. At 500 meters, instead of celebrating his personal best, he maintained mission focus. At 550 meters, when his body demanded air, his mind reminded him that failure was not an option. When Morrison finally surfaced at the 630-meter mark, he had not only shattered his own record but had exceeded Marcus's demonstration from their first training session. More importantly, he had broken through the mental barriers that had limited his performance for years. Marcus was waiting at the pool edge with a stopwatch and a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, Lieutenant Commander. Mission accomplished." Morrison treaded water for a moment, still processing what had just occurred. "I can't believe I just swam that far. How did you know I was capable of that distance?" "Because I've been watching you train for months," Marcus replied. "Your physical capabilities were always sufficient for distances over 600 meters. The only thing holding you back was your mind's protective mechanisms." As Morrison climbed out of the pool, other SEALs who had been secretly observing their training session gathered around. Rodriguez, who had been Morrison's closest competitor, approached with obvious amazement. "Morrison, we watched that entire swim. You just destroyed every record on this base. How is that possible?" Morrison looked at Marcus, then back at his fellow SEALs. It turns out that some of the most important training techniques aren't found in modern manuals. They're found in the experience of people who actually use these skills in life or death situations. Commander Hayes, who had been monitoring their progress from his office, arrived at the pool area just as the impromptu celebration was beginning. "Gentlemen, I believe we need to discuss expanding this training program to the entire team." Marcus packed up his equipment, knowing that his role on the base was about to change dramatically. The invisible janitor had proven his worth, and there would be no going back to anonymity. But as he watched the excited faces of the young SEALs discussing the possibilities of this new training approach, Marcus realized that the real victory wasn't breaking records. It was passing on knowledge that had been earned through decades of dangerous service to a new generation of warriors who would carry it forward. 3 weeks later, the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado was buzzing with activity as SEAL teams from across the country arrived for the annual underwater endurance competition. Teams from Virginia Beach, Little Creek, Pearl Harbor, and Naval Special Warfare Group 1 had sent their best swimmers to challenge Coronado's long-standing dominance. Marcus had spent those 3 weeks training not just Morrison, but the entire Coronado team. Rodriguez had improved from 380 meters to 520 meters. Williams had gone from 350 meters to 480 meters. Even the newest team members were approaching the 400-meter mark that had once seemed impossible. The visiting SEALs were confident and vocal about their chances. Chief Petty Officer David Shark Peterson from Virginia Beach had been training, specifically to beat Morrison's 450-meter record, and arrived boasting about his recent 470-meter training swim. "I hear Morrison's been getting some extra coaching," Peterson commented during the pre-competition briefing. "Doesn't matter. I've been training with Olympic coaches and using the latest performance enhancement techniques. This record is coming back to Virginia Beach." Lieutenant Michael Torpedo Jackson from Little Creek had also been preparing for this moment. His team had invested in cutting-edge breathing equipment and underwater monitoring technology. "We've analyzed every technique Morrison uses," Jackson announced confidently. "We know his weaknesses and we're prepared to exploit them." Marcus observed the visiting competitors during their practice sessions, noting their reliance on technology and modern training methods. They were undeniably skilled and well-prepared, but they were also predictable in their approaches. Their techniques were textbook perfect, but lacked the adaptability and mental toughness that combat experience provided. Commander Hayes had made an unusual decision for the competition. Instead of hiding Marcus's role in their team's preparation, he had announced that Coronado's improvement was due to training methods developed by a former Navy diving specialist who was currently employed as base maintenance staff. This announcement had created considerable buzz and skepticism among the visiting teams. The idea that a janitor had revolutionized SEAL underwater training seemed either like psychological warfare or a desperate attempt to explain away performance enhancement drugs. "They're trying to get in our heads," Peterson told his teammates. "No way a maintenance worker knows more about underwater swimming than our professional coaches." The morning of the competition arrived with perfect conditions. The ocean was calm, visibility was excellent, and water temperature was ideal for extended underwater swimming. Each team would have 3 swimmers compete, with their best single distance counting toward the overall team score. Marcus stood on the dock beside Commander Hayes, watching as competitors completed their final warm-up routines. For the first time in 8 years, he was wearing his old Navy dress uniform instead of janitor coveralls. His chest displayed the ribbons and medals that told the story of his distinguished service career. "Nervous?" Commander Hayes asked. "Not about the competition," Marcus replied. "I'm more concerned about what happens afterward. Once this story gets out, my quiet life is over." "You could have stayed invisible," Hayes pointed out. "Why did you choose to step forward?" Marcus watched Morrison complete his pre-competition breathing exercises with perfect form. "Because these young warriors deserve every advantage we can give them. They're going to face real combat situations where these skills might save their lives. If my experience can make them better, then it's my duty to share it." The competition began with swimmers from each base taking turns in timed attempts. The visiting teams performed admirably, with Peterson achieving 475 meters and Jackson reaching 485 meters. Both distances were impressive and would have easily won previous competitions. Rodriguez swam first for Coronado, stunning the crowd by achieving 525 meters and setting a new personal best under competition pressure. Williams followed with 490 meters, another performance that exceeded all expectations. The atmosphere became electric as Morrison prepared for his attempt. The visiting competitors realized they were witnessing something unprecedented, an entire team that had somehow achieved quantum improvements in just 3 weeks. Morrison entered the water with the calm confidence that Marcus had taught him. Instead of the nervous energy that had characterized his previous competitions, he displayed the focused determination of a combat diver, beginning a crucial mission. His underwater stroke was smooth and efficient, covering distance with minimal energy expenditure. The crowd followed his progress from the surface, noting the absence of the usual struggle and strain that marked maximum effort underwater swimming. At the 400-meter mark, Morrison was moving with the same steady rhythm he had maintained from the beginning. At 500 meters, spectators began to realize they were witnessing history. At 600 meters, the cheering became deafening as Morrison surpassed his previous record-breaking training performance. When Morrison finally surfaced at the 675-meter mark, the competition was effectively over. He had not only shattered the existing record, but had achieved a distance that seemed almost superhuman to observers who didn't understand the techniques that made it possible. Peterson and Jackson approached Marcus after the competition, their skepticism replaced by genuine curiosity. "Sir, we need to understand what you taught them," Peterson said respectfully. "Those improvements aren't physically possible with conventional training methods." Marcus smiled and gestured toward the water. "They're not just physically possible, they're replicable. But they require abandoning some modern assumptions and embracing techniques that were developed under real-world pressure." Commander Hayes stepped forward to address the gathering crowd of SEALs and officers. "Gentlemen, I'm pleased to announce that Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson, United States Navy retired, will be establishing a new underwater combat training program here at Coronado. Teams from all bases are welcome to send personnel for advanced instruction." The applause that followed was genuine and enthusiastic. Word of the day's events would spread quickly throughout the SEAL community, and Marcus knew that his quiet retirement was truly over. As the crowd dispersed and equipment was packed away, Morrison approached Marcus with obvious gratitude. "Chief, I need to ask you something that's been bothering me since our first training session." "What's that?" "During your active duty service, what was your personal underwater distance record?" Marcus looked out at the Pacific Ocean, remembering missions and challenges from decades past. "Officially, it was never recorded because most of my swims were during classified operations. But the longest single underwater swim I completed was 850 meters during a harbor infiltration in the Persian Gulf." Morrison stared at him in amazement. 850 meters? Why didn't you ever mention that?" Marcus picked up his equipment bag and started walking toward shore. "Because this competition was never about my records, Lieutenant Commander. It was about helping you discover what you were truly capable of achieving." As they walked back to the base together, Marcus realized that his most important mission was just beginning. The skills and knowledge that had been locked away in classified files were about to become the foundation for training the next generation of underwater warriors. 6 months after the competition, the Naval Amphibious Base Coronado had transformed into the premier underwater training facility in the United States military. Marcus's program had attracted attention from special operations forces worldwide, and his waiting list included elite units from allied nations. The small training office that had been assigned to Marcus was now a comprehensive underwater combat training center. The walls displayed photos of his former diving teams, declassified mission summaries, and a growing collection of new records set by students who had completed his program. Morrison, now an instructor in Marcus's program, had gone on to achieve personal underwater distances exceeding 700 meters. More importantly, he had successfully completed 2 combat deployments where his enhanced underwater skills had proven crucial to mission success. "Techniques you taught me saved my life during our harbor infiltration in Somalia," Morrison reported during one of their weekly debriefings. "When our extraction point was compromised, I was able to swim 600 meters underwater to an alternate pickup location. Without your training, that swim would have been impossible." Rodriguez had been accepted into the Navy's most elite underwater demolition unit after setting a new base record of 580 meters. Williams had become the lead instructor for basic underwater survival training. The entire Coronado team had elevated their performance to levels that were being studied by sports scientists and military researchers. But Marcus's influence extended far beyond individual achievements. His training methods had been incorporated into the official SEAL curriculum, and his techniques were being taught at underwater warfare schools across the military. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Some traditionalists had questioned whether techniques developed decades ago were relevant to modern warfare. Others had suggested that Marcus's methods were too risky for standard training applications. Marcus had addressed these concerns by demonstrating the scientific basis for his techniques and by maintaining perfect safety records throughout his program. Not a single student had suffered serious injury during training, despite the dramatic improvements in performance. "The techniques I teach aren't experimental," Marcus had explained to a gathering of military medical officers. "They were developed and refined during thousands of real-world missions over multiple decades. They're not untested theories. They're proven methods that have been validated under the most demanding conditions possible." The media attention had been intense but carefully managed. Military publications had featured articles about the miracle at Coronado and civilian swimming. Magazines had requested interviews about Marcus's revolutionary training methods. Marcus had agreed to limited media exposure, knowing that public attention could help promote underwater safety and training throughout the broader diving community. But he had insisted that the focus remain on the techniques and their applications rather than on his personal story. "I'm not interested in being famous," Marcus had told a reporter from Navy Times. "I'm interested in ensuring that every person who enters dangerous underwater situations has access to the best possible training and techniques." 1 year after the competition, Commander Hayes received a call that would cement Marcus's legacy within the military community. Admiral Sarah Richardson, the commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, wanted to visit Coronado to observe Marcus's training program personally. "Admiral Richardson has been following the performance improvements at Coronado," Hayes explained to Marcus. "She's considering implementing your methods throughout the entire special operations community." The Admiral's visit was conducted with minimal fanfare, but her conclusions were significant. After observing training sessions and reviewing performance data, she made a decision that would affect underwater training across all military branches. "Chief Thompson," Admiral Richardson announced during her final briefing, "I'm authorizing the expansion of your training program to all Naval Special Warfare facilities. Additionally, I'm requesting that you develop a standardized curriculum that can be implemented by instructors throughout the special operations community." Marcus accepted the assignment with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his entire career. "Admiral, I'm honored by your confidence. I'll ensure that these techniques are preserved and transmitted accurately to future generations of underwater warriors." The standardized curriculum that Marcus developed became known as the Thompson Underwater Combat Training Protocol. It was implemented at training facilities worldwide and became required education for all personnel involved in underwater operations. 2 years after stepping out of the shadows, Marcus had achieved something remarkable. The techniques that had been developed in secret during classified missions were now openly shared knowledge that improved safety and effectiveness for underwater operators around the world. But perhaps Marcus's greatest satisfaction came from the personal transformations he witnessed daily. Young SEALs who had struggled with confidence in the water became elite underwater operators. Veterans who had thought they had reached their physical limits discovered new capabilities they never knew existed. Every student who graduates from this program carries forward not just improved techniques, but a deeper understanding of what's possible when training is based on real-world experience rather than theoretical models. Marcus reflected during a ceremony honoring the program's 2nd anniversary. On quiet mornings, Marcus still arrived early at the pool, just as he had during his janitor days. But instead of cleaning equipment, he now spent those peaceful moments planning training sessions and reflecting on the journey that had brought him from invisibility to influence. The water still called to him, just as it had 30 years ago when he first learned to dive. But now, instead of completing dangerous missions in hostile waters, he was preparing others to face those challenges with every possible advantage. As Marcus watched the sunrise reflect off the calm surface of the training pool, he knew that his most important work was far from finished. Each new class of students represented another opportunity to pass forward the hard-earned knowledge that had been developed through decades of service in the world's most demanding underwater environments. The invisible janitor had become a visible legend, but his greatest pride remained in the accomplishments of those he trained, and the knowledge that his experience would continue protecting lives long after his own service had ended.